8, sharks all around. The rain poured down. Sarah could hear the water gurgling down the gutter pipes. All unusually wet and lingering storm had kept Sarah and her grandparents inside for several days. Sarah's grandfather gave her a stack of books so she could compare the chance of being eaten by a shark with other dangers. Every year, about 10 people in the United States are killed by sharks. Her grandfather told Sarah, "Make a list of things you find that are more dangerous." Sarah worked for a while. What does 1 in 300 million mean? That means 1 chance in 300 million, said her grandfather. Why? Well, that's your chance of being killed by a shark, according to the almanac. Sarah said, and she started to laugh. You have a 1 in a 10 million chance of being killed by a falling airplane part, a 1 in 5.5 million chance of being killed by a bee, and a 1 in 6,000 chance of being killed playing soccer in England. And look here, you have a better chance of being killed by a pig than a shark. The thought of being terrified of a pig suddenly seemed so funny that Sarah fell over laughing. Her grandparents were laughing as well. I can see it now, said Sarah, barely able to get her breath. Snouts, coming soon to a theater near you. When she finally stopped laughing, Grandma said, I hear it's going to be nice tomorrow. Why don't we all go out to the reef, Joe? There's that beautiful spot where we usually see Caribbean reef sharks and black tips. And we might even see a hammerhead. I hardly get to see my granddaughter now that you've started this shark business. I guess I'll have to join you. You swim with sharks too? Asked Sarah, amazed. I couldn't be married to your grandfather for over 50 years and not swim with sharks, said Sarah's grandmother with a big smile. What about Mom? Asked Sarah. Did she swim with sharks? Your mom too, Grandma admitted, though she was afraid of sharks until she was much older than you. She used to worry about her grandfather being eaten. It was a different time. Very few people understood sharks the way your grandfather did, and they scared her with their stories. The next day dawned with clear skies and as promised. A gentle breeze was the only thing that stirred the water. Sarah ran out to feed her lemon shark and the other fish that lived under the dock. She watched as the lemon shark appeared on schedule. Granddad says that scientists have studied sharks like you, Sarah told the shark as she fed it. He says you can learn how to get through a maze faster than a cat. Suddenly, she remembered all they had planned for the day. She ran to do her morning chores. By 9, the boat was packed and they were ready to go. The boat's bow broke the perfect glassy surface of the water. Better hang on, Grandma, warned Sarah. As soon as we get around the bend, Granddad will step on it. I know, said Grandma and laughed. He's been driving that way since I can remember. Sarah's grandparents seemed to know by heart. As always, Granddad anchored carefully to the sand so he wouldn't damage the coral. As Grandma and Sarah put on their masks, snorkels, and fins, Granddad gleefully threw stinky clumps of chum overboard. Hold on to the anchor rope and stay with Grandma, Granddad said. Don't raise your hands or swim away from the boat. These sharks will be using their sense of smell and sight to find the fish. They'll know the difference between you and a piece of chum. As he spoke these words of caution, he watched the water carefully. Sarah's stomach tightened. Even though she had done this before, it was still scary. For an instant, she almost lost her nerve. Panicked, she looked over at her grandfather. He was so happy throwing those smelly hunks of fish and meat into the water. Her grandmother slipped off the boat. Sarah took a deep breath and slowly let it out. That made her feel calmer. She crossed her fingers and slid into the water. Her grandmother watched as Sarah entered the water. She waved over her to the anchor line and then pointed to the large barracuda. Sarah had watched barracuda for years, and the sight of their needle-sharp teeth did not bother her. She had bigger teeth to worry about. She didn't have to wait before long before a distinctive shape emerging from around the coral island. Then another. Within minutes, 6 sharks ranging from 5 to 8 feet long had appeared. They fed on the bits of chum. The reef fish didn't leave. They were also feeding on the tiny bits of fish in the water. Sarah had always thought that all the fish in the area fled when sharks arrived. Another myth. The sharks and fish swam and turned together in a swirl, ever-changing mass. More sharks arrived. Soon, there were almost a dozen in front of them. Grandma spoke through her snorkel. "These are all Caribbean reef sharks." Grandma's words were a bit garbled, but Sarah could understand her. "This large one is a female. See the others over there? They have claspers attached to their pelvic fins, the fins on their bellies. They're males." Sarah nodded. She'd seen claspers on tiger sharks. The claspers were named by Aristotle, who thought the male sharks grabbed the females with them. The name stuck, even though we know they don't grab them. "What do they do with them?" asked Sarah, suddenly curious. "They mate," answered Grandma, her eyes crinkled behind her mask. "Oh," said Sarah, and then quickly turned in to what was happening around them. The activity had picked up and the sharks were moving more quickly. One passed within 2 feet of Sarah and Eddie. Sarah squealed through her snorkel as the shark retreated into the deep, hazy blueness beyond her sight. She held onto the rope as several smaller sharks arrived. "That's a nurse shark," Grandma sputtered and pointed to a small shark near the bottom. "See how its mouth is nearly at the end, not underneath like the other sharks? Look there. That's a black-tip shark. And over there, a little sharp-nosed shark. They never get much bigger than 3 feet long." Sharks were everywhere. They moved swiftly at times and slowly at others. It seemed to Sarah that they were aware of each other and the humans as well. Granddad eased into the water after throwing out the last of the chum. At the sound of his splash, the sharks departed to the edges of the white sand clearing. When he moved to the anchor line, they returned. A cloud of blood dissolved into the water. "Why don't they eat the other fish?" Sarah asked as clearly as she could through the snorkel. "It's too much work," hooted Granddad. "They'd rather get an easy meal of chum rather than use up energy chasing a fish they may not catch." That seemed sensible, Sarah thought. "Look here," Granddad called as he pointed to a small blue fish with a black and white striped head. "That's a wars. They're cleaner fish. They eat parasites, tiny animals that make their homes on the shark's skin and gills. See the big angelfish tilt sideways? That's a signal that the wars may approach and clean it." Sarah watched the fish nibble for a moment and then move on to the head of the shark. The shark wasn't bothered, and the fish soon ate its fill and left. An odd-looking fish with a flat place on its head that looked like the sole of a running shoe swam by. Sarah pointed to it, and Grandma called out, "A remora." "I love them. They attach themselves to bigger animals and get a free ride." The remora swam under the bank of humans holding onto the rope. "I think it wants to come with us," Sarah huffed and giggled. Sarah was amazed that she could be so relaxed with sharks all around her. They were perfectly adapted to the reef and the ocean. It made the 3 humans seem very unimportant. The sharks and the fish danced in a ballet that they'd perfected over the eons they had existed in the sea. The chum was soon gone, and so were the sharks. Sarah wondered how far the sharks had come and where they had all gone. She thought of the lemon shark they'd tracked and her times of activity and times of stillness. The reef fish schooled and spun in one large group. There was no sign that a dozen sharks had just fed among them. The soft pulses of the waves moved in the entire community of plants and animals. The light played through the water, streaking down in columns. It was just another moment in time on the reef. It could have been any moment in the past hundreds of millions of years, but this moment was Sarah's. The reef cast its spell on the group. Sarah swam out, held her breath, and dove to get a better look at the corals. She moved smoothly and gracefully. Her grandfather joined her. Her grandmother chased a school of silvery sardines, and her hair, of the same color, streaming out behind her. Sarah dove after her grandfather to inspect the lobsters, crabs, and small fish he pointed out. On one dive, he found a sleeping nurse shark wedged beneath a coral head. Sarah dove down and hung there as long as she could before she had to return to the surface for breath. As the humans scrambled back into their boat, the spell was broken. They were no longer creatures of the reef. They dried off, opened the cooler, and took out their lunch. "So, what do you think your friends are doing right now?" asked Grandma. "Nothing like this," Sarah replied, and took a huge bite of her ham sandwich. Joe Santos looked out over the turquoise water where the sharks had just been feeding, and quietly nodded his head. That's the end of Chapter 8. Next time, Chapter 9.